Prices continue to soar, and international events cause people real anxiety as they're looking at these situations. They're already struggling, they're already feeling the squeeze in the cost of living as more than they ever have before. Will she now recognise that this is a crisis for families, and will she put in real support to help families through the cost of living crisis?
Chancellor.
I'll just say with respect to the Honourable Lady, on the 1st of April, energy prices will fall by an average of £117 because of the action that I took in the budget. It will be frozen at that point until the end of June. And as the former Chancellor and other members have said, the most important thing we can do now is de-escalate the crisis. But if the Honourable Lady really believes in energy security, she should back Labour's plans to invest in nuclear energy, including the jobs that would create in Scotland.
Gareth Snell.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Chancellor's announcement, reiteration of the extension of the supercharger scheme, but she will know that that only really helps 10% of energy-intensive industry in this country, and in particular those that are electro-intensive. So with the price per firm in gas pretty much double what it was last week, is she able to set out what help might be available for gas-intensive industry and those electro-industries that aren't in the supercharger scheme? And if the de-escalation doesn't come, that we all hope it does, will she agree to meet with those energy-intensive industries to see how those that are impacted by gas prices can get some immediate relief?
Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and it is a really important point. 500 businesses will benefit from an increased discount through the supercharger, taking that discount from 60% to 90% from April. And next April, the British Industry Competitiveness Scheme comes in, benefiting, I think, around 7,000 businesses. That is set to go from next April, but of course we will continue to look at how we can support our energy-intensive industries if the current situation continues in the Middle East.
John Glenn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given it was promised at the start of June last year, when will the Chancellor sign off on the Defence Investment Plan?
Chancellor.
Well, thank the honourable gentleman for that question. I have huge respect for him for the time he spent at the Treasury. As the honourable gentleman knows, the previous government committed to get to 2.5% by the end of this Parliament. We're committing to bring that forward, and by April next year we will be spending 2.6% of GDP. We will set out the Defence Investment Plan based on the strategic defence review that we did, and of course the previous government didn't even bother to do a strategic defence review.
Sam Rushford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've already got constituents in places like Weardale, Teesdale and Gorness Valley who are paying double for their heating oil to what they would have paid a week ago, and some of them simply can't afford to fill up their tanks. Thanks to the fiscal headroom that this Chancellor has created, there is money in the system to support them. Will she look at things like fixed-term payments in the short term, but also in the longer term, perhaps an expansion of the Warm Homes grant to help them to transition to cheaper forms of fuel?
Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for that question. As I set out in my statement, we put £15 billion into the Warm Homes plan at the spending review last year to better insulate people's homes and help them to move to cheaper forms of energy. But I do recognise the immediate problems around heating oil. That's why I've asked the Competition and Markets Authority to look at price gauging, but also why the Financial Secretary to the Treasury will be meeting with MPs, and I hope that on behalf of his constituents in Bishop Auckland, he will be there next week, on Wednesday.
Sarah Dyke.
Deputy Speaker, since the outbreak of the conflict in the Middle East, heating oil prices have increased by over 100%. It's a harsh reminder that relying on volatile fossil fuel markets leaves households financially vulnerable. Many rural households off the gas grid, like Julian from East Lambrook, aren't protected by the energy price cap. So does she agree that this is unfair on rural communities? And will she take steps to develop a mechanism to protect these householders from damaging global fossil fuel price shocks?
Chancellor.
The first thing I would say to her and also to her constituent and other constituents that almost every house will use electricity for turning on the lights, and they will benefit from some of these changes that come in on the 1st of April. 4% of households in Great Britain rely on heating oil. It's more than 60% in Northern Ireland. We do recognise the unique situation here. The increase in the price in the last few days does not reflect market conditions, which is why we've asked the Competition and Markets Authority to urgently look at extortionate prices and also ensuring that supply remains stable, because there is enough heating oil available, but what we don't want is people to be priced out of it.
Matt Rodder.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could I welcome the Chancellor's statement and thank her for the work that she's doing to reduce the dependence on fossil fuels. Could she say a little bit more about the long-term work she's doing to increase grid capacity and to change the planning system to help invest in new nuclear and in solar?
Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for that question. We made changes to the National Policy Planning Framework just a few days into this government, and at the end of last year we passed the Planning and Infrastructure Act, which makes it easier to build a whole range of infrastructure, from housing to data centres and, crucially, to energy infrastructure. The Planning and Infrastructure Act was opposed by the parties opposite. They need to explain why they're against building the grid connections that will help us to benefit from cheaper energy.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I agree with the Chancellor that de-escalation is desirable, but the fact is this conflict is likely to go on for many months. And she talks about reducing our reliance on fossil fuels. I can agree with that, but businesses are operating in the here and now. Exactly. And they want some reassurance that the medium-sized business, forget the 500 that are going to benefit from the supercharger. What message can she give to the medium-sized businesses who are very concerned and are currently having to lay off staff?
Chancellor.
I recognise the concerns around businesses, and as well as the supercharger, the BIC scheme is coming in next year, and of course we are monitoring very carefully the situation to see what else might be necessary. But I would say that de-escalation is so important here. There is no reason why this conflict has to go on for months and months. Nobody wants that. It is in no one's interest. We need to quickly get vessels flowing through the Straits of Hormuz. That is why I'm meeting with Lloyd's of London later today to work through what insurance products can be introduced. And it's why on the G7 finance ministers' call this afternoon we talked about how we can guarantee the safety of vessels flowing through that strait.
Karen Moon.
Whereas, Madam Deputy Speaker, tens of thousands of homes across Cornwall are still totally reliant on heating oil. So I'm delighted that the Chancellor has confirmed that the Chief Secretary of State's Treasury will be meeting rural MPs who are disproportionately affected by the crisis. But does she agree with me that in order to accelerate away from a fossil-fuelled economy, the British Business Bank, National Wealth Fund and GB Energy need to take a more dynamic attitude to risk when supporting renewable energy projects?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and can I also thank the rural group of Labour MPs for contacting me over the weekend with their stories and their suggestions, and that is why the Financial Secretary to the Treasurer have been meeting with MPs on Wednesday this week. In terms of the National Wealth Fund and the British Business Bank, they are already investing heavily in renewables, and we increased their budget to be able to do so. I also recognise that there are important opportunities in Cornwall, not just the South Crofty tin mine in his constituency, but other energy projects, including geothermal energy. And I've asked the National Wealth Fund to look again at those opportunities.
Robert Jenrick.
The British people are being clobbered. She could have come here today and scrapped her hike in fuel duty. She could have come here today and ended the insanity and got drilling again in the North Sea. Instead, she offered nothing. Absolutely nothing. This crisis deserves a proper response. When will she finally understand that for now at least she is the Chancellor, not just a bystander?
Chancellor.
Cuts in freezing fuel duty, Reform opposed it. The energy profits levy, he introduced it when he was in the Conservative government, so I'll take no lectures for him and the Tory Tribute Act sitting up there.
Will Crichton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Chancellor for his statement, for her support for the armed forces and for acknowledging the anxiety of constituents abroad. Closer to home, in fact at home, half of my constituents in the Hill and Near outside the town of Strawley rely on heating oil to heat their homes. They face great uncertainty, no guarantee of delivery, no guarantee of price on delivery. I hear what money-saving expert Martin Lewis hears, fears of price gouging and price rises. So I welcome Treasury talks and I hope that they will lead to further scrutiny and regulation of this unregulated industry. Otherwise, I will have to introduce the Chief Financial Secretary of the Treasury to the old Lewis tradition of cutting peat for winter fuel.
Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for his question and recognise that his constituency, more than most, will be affected by worries around delivery and price of heating oil. That's why I've instructed the Competition and Markets Authority to look at price gauging, and it's also why the Financial Secretary to the Treasury will be meeting with my honourable friend and other concerned MPs on Wednesday this week.
Tom Tugendhat.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I ask the Chancellor, looking forward at the decisions she's making on the strategic reserve being used for defence, will that include the availability for the Royal Navy to prepare warships to go to sea? Clearly, there has been rumour over the last few days that one of the reasons why one of Her Majesty's ships, or His Majesty's ships, sorry, forgive me, is not ready for sea is because the contracts are working 9 to 5. Will she be able to fund this properly so that all ships are available as quickly as possible?
Chancellor.
I thank the honourable gentleman for that question. I confirm that there are no financial impediments for warships going to the Middle East, and that money through the the special reserve is absolutely available for personnel and contracts for all of our operations in the Middle East.
Alex Baker.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as the Member of Parliament for the home of the British Army, can I thank the Chancellor for her support for our armed forces. My constituency is also home to innovative defence and aerospace businesses, and many are ambitious to expand and play their part in strengthening our national security, but that depends on being able to access the investment they need to scale up. Can the Chancellor reassure these businesses in my constituency that this government will continue to work closely with the financial sector to ensure British defence and advanced manufacturing companies can access the capital they need to invest, grow and create good, skilled jobs here in the UK?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. As my honourable friend knows, we have increased the funding available to both UK Export Finance and the National Wealth Fund to invest and support our defence industry. And also I support the work that my honourable friend and the honourable member for York Outer are doing in ensuring that the financial services sector also lends to defence businesses, including scale-up businesses.
David Chadwick.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Almost two-thirds of homes across Brecon, Radnor and Cumtower are dependent on heating oil, the price of which is now surging thanks to Donald Trump's decision to bomb Iran. Can she reassure my constituents that help will be on the way from the government?
Chancellor.
Thank the honourable gentleman for that question. The meeting with the Financial Secretary to the Treasury will be open to all MPs and is on Wednesday this week, and I very much urge him to attend that meeting. We are aware of the unique situation concerning heating oil. That's why I've instructed the Competition and Markets Authority, but are also keen to hear directly from MPs.
Calvin Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The impacts of this conflict spiralling are serious and will fall upon our constituents' pockets. So I welcome the Chancellor's statement and measures to address these. And yet, last week, the honourable member for Clapton was in the United States attempting to lobby against our national interests, on this occasion with a comical lack of success. So would my right honourable friend agree that the impact of living costs can only be compounded by the continued, deeply unpatriotic interventions of the benches opposite?
I thank the honourable and gallant, my honourable and gallant friend for his question, and also for his contributions in the debates last week as well. And my honourable and gallant friend knows how important it is to de-escalate, because it is our armed services personnel who would be the front line of any escalation of the crisis. And de-escalation, of course, is also in the interests of all of our constituents, whether it is on heating oil, the price paid at the pumps, or indeed on their mortgage rates. And that is why this government is putting all of our diplomatic efforts into de-escalating this crisis and reopening the Strait of Hormuz.
Simon Hall.
Speaker, as heating oil prices go up and petrol prices go up in rural North Dorset, my constituents are hearing the Chancellor echo one of her predecessors, I think, effectively saying, crisis, what crisis? She needs to, I think, actively get a grip on this. Motorists in rural areas use their cars because they have to. The vast majority of them are off-grid. They have no alternative to keep warm other than using heating oil. This is a crisis in costs taking place today, which meetings and letters to the CMA are not going to help or address. Can she confirm, she's mentioned that this meeting has been organised on Wednesday and that invitations have gone out for it. Is it, we don't need the Honourable Member for Swansea West gesticulating like some string...
Order. The question is for...
Forgive me. Sorry.
Too long. Chancellor.
I've got huge respect for the honourable member, and I thank him for his question. As the former Chancellor of the Exchequer says, it is too early to know what the impact of this crisis is going to be. It's why today I met with G7 Finance Minister colleagues, which I'm sure he welcomes, where we discussed the release of the International Energy Agency strategic oil reserves, for example, because what is needed to contain prices for all of our constituents is to make sure that we have the oil and gas on the market that we need, and that is why we are prioritising those diplomatic routes to de-escalate this crisis.
Jonathan Davis.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Chancellor for his statement, because this is not just a worrying time for our national security but for our economy too. I am pleased to hear about the work that's going on with the Competition and Markets Authority in respect of consumers of heating oil. But perhaps I could suggest to her that she has a conversation with her colleagues in Desnes to expedite the £1 billion worth of community energy investment coming through the local power fund and focus that investment as quickly as possible into rural areas like mine in Derbyshire, because if this is going to be a protracted conflict, that's something that could make a difference.
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and I put in £1 billion for the Community Investment Fund in local energy schemes in the spending review last year to make sure that communities are more self-reliant for their basic energy needs. That is a lesson from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and it is also the lesson of this conflict in the Middle East, that we need to be more resilient, more secure as an economy, and that is exactly what we are doing.
Ellie Chowns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Iran crisis highlights the urgent need to speed up the UK's energy system transition to clean, green, cheap renewables and energy efficiency. Now, the last time that energy prices went through the roof due to illegal international aggression in 2022, normal people paid the price, while huge energy giants raked in billions of pounds in windfall profits. So will the Chancellor guarantee that in responding to this crisis now, she'll do everything possible to protect ordinary households and ensure that no energy company makes profits from this war?
I thank the honourable lady for that question. Well, the reason why we have the Energy Profits Levy and also the Electricity Generators Levy is to ensure just that. But if the honourable lady is really serious about energy security and investing in low-carbon energy, I really don't understand why her party opposes the planning reform so we can build the grid infrastructure, and opposes both small modular reactors and also new nuclear in Suffolk. All of those things add to our energy security and reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. Why do the Greens oppose it?
Tom Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I respect the Conservatives opposite, who are calling for de-escalation, but they need to have a word with their leader, who wanted to sign Britain up to a war of choice with changing goals and no clear timescales, thereby contributing to the chaos and the worsening cost of living crisis.
The Chancellor has a plan, and we're seeing inflation, interest rates and government borrowing falling as a result. Will she commit to keeping to that plan, to keep bringing down borrowing so that the country can live more within its means and get rid of the awful inheritance left by the Conservatives?
Yes, last week's spring forecast from the Office for Budget Responsibility showed inflation coming down, borrowing coming down and debt coming down. Our economy is fundamentally strong, but we all need to see a de-escalation of this conflict and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz to ensure that our constituents continue to benefit from falling energy bills and falling interest rates, and that is why we're so focused on the diplomatic efforts.
Sir Oliver Dowden.
As the Chancellor has repeatedly said, at the root of the current economic crisis lies the closure of the Straits of Hormuz. So what conversations has the government had with the Trump administration, both about insurance, but more importantly, about deploying UK military assets to secure the reopening of the Straits? And would she agree with me that a more robust approach might reassure our friends and allies in the Gulf who invest so much in the United Kingdom, and where our presence has been noted in its absence?
I thank the honourable gentleman for that question. There are two things that are needed to reopen or effectively reopen the Strait. The first is security for vessels passing through it, and that will require a cross-country action involving, of course, the US, but also the UK, France, and we all stand ready to do that, and that was one of the things that we discussed on our G7 finance ministers' call today. But once that is provided, we also need to make sure that there are appropriate insurance products in place. We're working again with Lloyds and with the US administration. We are the global leader in maritime insurance, and so we've got an important role to play to ensure that those vessels are properly insured once they do start to move again.
Josh Newbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor has taken decisive action to bring down energy bills, but as she noted, those who rely on heating oil are often the most exposed to sudden price shocks. Even in my fairly urban constituency, there are hundreds of households in this position, and some have been in touch with me because the cost of heating oil has doubled in a week due to the effect of the Iran conflict. So as the Chancellor works to shield the British public from the economic fallout, will she make sure households on heating oil are protected from the shocking increases we're currently seeing?
It is important that the players in the heating oil sector behave responsibly and do not seek to profiteer from this current conflict because it is their customers who will lose out, which is why we've instructed the Competition and Markets Authority to guard against that price gorging. I know that he will attend the meeting with the Financial Secretary to the Treasury on Wednesday to make those representations, but the best thing that we can do is to de-escalate and get those vessels flowing to get that oil and gas moving.
Helen Morgan.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. 1 in 3 households in North Shropshire are dependent on heating oil, and I declare an interest because mine is one of them. People have been in contact with me since last week, concerned about the rapid escalation of heating oil costs. I welcome the Chancellor's announcement that she recognises that problem and wants to act on it. Can she outline in more detail what kind of remedy she's envisaging and how soon we might be able to see it put in place?
I said in my statement that despite what we did in the budget last year to take £150 off domestic energy bills, there is a unique situation with regard to heating oil. That's why I was pleased to receive representations over the weekend on it. The Treasury are working through those proposals, and it's why the Financial Secretary to the Treasury will meet with MPs this week. But the reason why prices are going up is because of the challenges in getting oil and gas out of the Middle East. That's why it's so important to de-escalate, but it is wrong for anyone to profiteer off the back of this crisis.
Luke Charters.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Many of my constituents stranded in the Middle East have been left out of pocket because of their travel insurance, and in my view as a former regulator, they have overly broad exclusion terms in those policies. So would my right honourable friend update the House on her meetings with the insurance sector, the FCA and consumer groups, and would she agree for the City Ministers to meet me to discuss this?
Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and I'm sure that the relevant minister, whether that is in the Department for Transport or indeed the Economic Secretary to the Treasury, meets with my honourable friend. It is important that everybody who wants to get home from the Middle East is able to do so. We welcome the work that the airlines are doing to get people home with the support of the government, but it's also important that people are not ripped off for that.
Harriet Cross.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've heard the Chancellor and others on the government front bench for months now saying that we'll be using oil and gas for years to come, and of course we will. No matter how much they wish that away now, we'll be using oil and gas for years to come. We must secure our supply. In her meeting this morning with G7 finance ministers, does any of them say that banning new oil and gas licences from the North Sea is a good idea? Or any of them banning themselves from their own energy resources?
Chancellor.
I thank the honourable lady for that question. It was, of course, her own party that introduced the energy profits levy in the first place, and introduced it for a good reason, because many of the questions today have been about the impact on prices. And of course, the way that support was given to consumers during the Russia-Ukraine crisis was through money from the energy profits levy, then being used to subsidise people's bills. That's why we have the energy profits levy.
Dave Robertson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Chancellor for her statement today? She is absolutely right to take the action that she has on energy prices, particularly given that 20% of the world's oil is transported via the Straits of Hormuz. However, the Straits of Hormuz also transports over a third of the world's urea, almost half of its sulphur and a significant amount of ammonia. So can I ask the Chancellor what steps she's taking to protect our farmers from spiking fertiliser prices at the same time as energy prices are rising?
Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for that question. We're working closely with DBT and DEFRA as well as business to understand the different parts of industry that will be affected by a protracted conflict. But this is just another reason why it is so important to de-escalate. That is exactly what we are seeking to do, and it is also why we are working with G7 allies focused on reopening the Strait of Hormuz, because that's the best thing we can do to bring down prices and ensure supply continues to flow.
Saoirse Eastwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the statement this afternoon from the Chancellor. As she's already outlined, Northern Ireland is uniquely exposed. Up to 70% of people right across Northern Ireland are reliant on home heating oil. Instead of meeting with me, would you be able to tell me that you have plans to meet with the Minister of Economy in Northern Ireland this week, and indeed my ministerial colleagues in the Northern Ireland Executive, to see how we can best support our people?
Chancellor.
It's really important to understand the extent of the impact on Northern Ireland. When we made this announcement of the budget, we did make money available for Northern Ireland to have their own scheme recognising the slightly different energy market in Northern Ireland. I know that the Financial Secretary to the Treasury, who's leading on this work at the Treasury, is meeting with his opposite numbers in the Northern Ireland Executive to make sure that we understand the challenges there and what we can do to best support.
Tony Vaughan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Chancellor for her statement, which really does underline the importance of new nuclear to boost our energy security. Many of us who back new nuclear also care deeply about nature, and Dungeness in my constituency is both a nationally important habitat site and a vital location for new nuclear. So does the Chancellor agree that we urgently need a reformed framework for habitat protection along the lines proposed by Fingleton Review, so we can safeguard the environment and welcome new nuclear back to places like Dungeness?
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and also his pragmatic approach. We will be responding to Fingleton in the next few days, and then legislating as quickly as possible to make it cheaper and quicker to build the energy infrastructure that we know we need.
Sir Alex Shelbrooke.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, defence industry supply chains really are desperately in need of the DIP. The Chancellor talks about the money that's being invested, but why is the Treasury not allowing the DIP to go forward? Because it's starting to become really critical, and we need that infrastructure. Secretary of State is desperate for that infrastructure. We need to know when's that coming forward. It was the government's self-imposed deadlines, nobody else's.
Well, we published the Strategic Defence Review earlier this year, and in the spending review last year, the biggest uplifts in spending were at the Ministry of Defence and at the Department of Health. The previous government said they were going to get to 2.5% at the end of the next Parliament. We're going to get to it to 2.6% by April next year, and that money is already being spent. He doesn't need to worry about that.
Peggy Shanker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I know that my constituents in Derby will be worried about the devastation that they see across the Middle East and will agree that de-escalation must remain a priority. But they're also worried about the impact on their weekly shopping bills, their petrol prices and their energy bills. Will the Chancellor agree with me that stability for our businesses and local people is absolutely vital given the volatility that we're seeing internationally?
Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for that question. That's why I'm pleased that since I became Chancellor, the Bank of England have cut interest rates 6 times, why we were able to take £150 off of energy bills and also freeze prescription charges and rail fares. And of course, in my honourable friend's constituency, you have Rolls-Royce, who will benefit both from small modular reactors and also the increased defence spending that is already going in.
Ben Lake.
72% of households in Ceredigion and Preseli do not have a connection to the mains gas grid. And for those who filled their tanks over the weekend, the consequences of the Iran crisis have become very, very real. For those who are still to do so, they're very anxious to learn of when any potential support that might be agreed on Wednesday will be brought forward.
Councillor.
I recognise that there are significant challenges in some areas of Wales, as indeed there is in Northern Ireland, and I very much encourage the honourable gentleman to attend the meeting with the Financial Secretary Treasury. We have already had representations over the weekend about what is needed, but I want MPs from all parties to be able to contribute to that. But the best way to reduce prices is getting that oil and gas flowing again, which is why it's so important to have both a military solution to get the Strait of Hormuz open, but also an insurance solution, which is what I'm working very closely on at the moment.
Can I thank the Chancellor for her statement this afternoon, and I'll allow a few moments for the front benches to swap over. I appreciate a lot of members will be disappointed not to have got in this afternoon. I will try to prioritise them in the next statement, if at all possible. Which brings us to a statement from the Secretary of State for Defence.
With permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I wish to make a statement to update the House on the Middle East. And there's a lot to update, and I trust the House will understand. I want to start by praising our armed forces, who are working 24/7 to protect British lives and British interests in the region. From our 400-strong air defence teams in Cyprus, who I visited last week, to our counter-drone specialists in Iraq, our fast jet pilots in Qatar, our command specialists in the regional defence coordination centres, and everyone working on this crisis abroad and at home. Iran threatens us all, but it's our forces who feel this most acutely. So I'm sure the whole House will join me in thanking them for their outstanding dedication and for their professionalism. For protecting British lives, for keeping us safe, we want to say to them, you are the best of Britain in action. Madam Deputy Speaker, the UK's government approach throughout the current developments in the Middle East is founded on 3 principles. First, defensive, taking the necessary action to strengthen our collective defence. So we took steps from January, weeks before this current war with Iran began, to pre-position Typhoons, F-35s, counter-drone teams, radars and defence in the region, as well as the additional military capability we've sent since last Saturday, when the Iranian retaliation attacks started. Second, coordination with allies. We do not work alone, so we're leading and coordinating our response with NATO allies and other partners, including the US, E5 nations and the Gulf states. And I'm in daily contact with my counterparts, just as the Chief of Defence Staff is too. And third, Madam Deputy Speaker, our third principle is legal. We must have a legal basis for our decisions that allows ministers to make sound choices. It allows our military to operate with the fullest confidence. And our UK action is grounded in these principles to protect British people, protect British bases, to protect British allies. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, in the last week, we've seen Iran lashing out with dangerous, indiscriminate and reckless strikes. In the first day alone, they attacked 10 countries with military and civilian targets attacked, including hotels in Dubai and Bahrain and the Kuwaiti National Airport. British troops stationed at a US base in Bahrain were within a few hundred yards of an Iranian strike, and a small drone hit our base in Cyprus coming from Lebanon or Iraq. And Iraq has now fired over 500 ballistic and cruise missiles and over 2,000 drones. Thank you. Has now fired over 500 ballistic and cruise missiles and over 2,000 drones. I'm grateful to him for paying attention to my statement quite so closely. And even after the Iranian president's apology and promise to the Gulf states over the weekend, Iran still then struck multiple countries with drones and missiles, including Bahrain, where 32 civilians were injured in one attack and a desalination plant was hit in another. We totally condemn these attacks. They're putting hundreds of thousands of people at risk, including British nationals and members of our armed forces. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, while Iran's current indiscriminate strikes began last Saturday, this Iranian regime has for decades been a source of evil, exporting violence across the Middle East and beyond. It supplied nearly 60,000 Shahid drones to Putin for Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. Here in the UK, they conduct aggressive cyber attacks against us and have plotted assassination on Britain's streets. The Iranian regime is a destructive force which has slaughtered protesters in its own streets and inflicts terrible suffering, especially against its own people. We want to see Iran stop their strikes, give up their nuclear ambitions and restart the negotiations. And as Defence Secretary, my number one priority is protecting British people, military and civilian alike. Since January, we've moved significant military assets into the region ahead of those first US-Israeli strikes. And those preparations made a real difference. It meant we've conducted defensive military operations from day one. Our F-35s destroying Iranian drones over Jordan. Our Typhoons shooting down targets heading to Qatar. Our counter-drone units defeating further attacks against coalition bases in Iraq. We acted early to protect British people and British interests and to support our allies. And as the Iranian response became clear from last weekend, we adapted our actions to the changing circumstances, driven at all times by military advice. So that's why we agreed a new US request for the use of British bases at RAF Fairford and Diego Garcia last Sunday. And that's why I committed further resources to the region last week, including 4 extra Typhoons, 3 Wildcat helicopters, a Merlin helicopter and HMS Dragon. And I can confirm today that Dragon will set sail in the next couple of days. And I want to personally thank all those who are working tirelessly, some 22 hours a day, to get that ship ready. HMS Dragon will join US air defence destroyers to provide additional protection in the eastern Mediterranean. And Madam Deputy Speaker, let me also provide the House with the following operational update from last night. The UK is now conducting defensive air sorties in support of the UAE. Typhoons successfully took out 2 drones, one over Jordan, the second heading to Bahrain. The third Wildcat has now arrived in Cyprus, and we've now deployed additional RAF operations experts in more than 5 countries in the region, helping coordinate regional military and civilian airspace. And the fragments of that drone that hit Akrotiri are being analysed for foreign military hardware by our experts at DSTL. British pilots have now racked up over 230 flying hours. We have 8 jets in Qatar, including our joint Qatari-British squadron, who are flying in support of regional allies, and we have more jets in Cyprus than any other nation. And I visited our 400-strong air defence teams at our base in Cyprus on Thursday last week. They're there in addition to the 4,000 personnel regularly stationed on the island. I was subjected to the daily air sirens that they face. I saw the impact that Iranian proxy drone had caused, and I asked the Commander of British Forces, General Tom Buick, "Do you need anything more from us back in Britain?" And he said to me, "No, I've been given everything I have asked for." The UK is leading this response to Iranian threats in close coordination with our allies. And Cyprus's head of the National Guard told me last week, our military cooperation has never been closer. And our support is backed up by our NATO allies, including the US, France, Greece and Germany, something I discussed with E5 defence ministers last week. And I can also confirm to the House that having given the US the go-ahead to use British bases for specific defensive operations into Iran last Sunday, the first US bomber landed at RAF Fairford on Friday. And as the Prime Minister has set out, this activity is part of, I quote, the collective self-defence of long-standing friends and allies and protecting British lives. It is in accordance with international law. These missions are to destroy Iranian missiles at source. Madam Deputy Speaker, we are deeply concerned about escalation in Lebanon. Hezbollah is a dangerous terror organisation tied to the regime in Iran. It must cease these attacks against Israel. But we do not want to see Israel expand this conflict further into Lebanon. More than 400 have already been killed and 500,000 displaced by recent Israeli operations. The solution to these problems, to this conflict, must be guided by the Lebanese people and the Lebanese government. And we urge de-escalation and the return to a negotiated process. Now, I know, moving beyond defence, that many of us as MPs have constituents with friends and family that are caught in the region, worried for the safety of their loved ones. And my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary and the FCDO teams are working as fast as possible to get our people out of the region. 3 chartered flights have now taken off, with more to come this week. More than 170,000 people have registered their presence, which has allowed us to get them information and support and advice that they need. More than 37,000 British nationals have been evacuated since the start of the crisis response, and as the Prime Minister said last week, we will not stop until our people are safe. Madam Deputy Speaker, these are deeply uncertain times. While we deal with the immediate crisis in the Middle East, we must also maintain our strong support for Ukraine, deter increasing threats in the High North, fulfil our NATO commitments and ensure our homeland is protected. Our adversaries are watching. We must manage rising demands on defence, balancing resources to best effect. And we must also deal with the cost of living impact this conflict could cause, just as my right honourable friend the Chancellor has set out in her statement. I'm proud of the UK's response acting at all times in our national interest. We will defend our allies. We will support our armed forces. We will do everything necessary to protect British lives and British interests, to make Britain secure at home and strong abroad. I commend
Shadow Secretary of State, James.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement and the briefing I received from his officials this morning. Can I begin by offering condolences on behalf of the opposition to the 7 US soldiers killed in action as part of their ongoing action against Iran. I join the Secretary of State in utterly condemning Iran's indiscriminate attacks across the region and in expressing my gratitude and that of the opposition to all our brilliant, brave service personnel and their families who are stationed out there. Of course, the Secretary of State and I will agree that the #1 responsibility of any government is to defend its people, and that everything possible must be done to secure our sovereign bases, particularly RAF Akrotiri on Cyprus, attacked by drones a week ago. That is an incredibly serious development. We support the government in taking steps to use the RAF and other assets to protect the airspace and defend against drone and missile threats to Akrotiri, but also in deploying our Air Force to defend allies in the region as an act of collective self-defence. The problem is this. Any serious integrated missile defence plan for the sovereign base areas on Cyprus would by necessity include the presence of one of our highly capable Type 45 air defence destroyers. And yet, despite the Secretary of State just saying, and I quote, since January, he has been moving military assets to the region. There isn't a single Royal Navy warship present, and our Type 45 HMS Dragon hasn't even set sail. Can he confirm that the government only decided last Tuesday to send a Type 45 to the Eastern Med after the US action had already commenced and 2 days after RAF Akrotiri was attacked by kamikaze drones? Of particular importance, Madam Deputy Speaker, it has been widely reported that the Royal Navy recommended to ministers weeks ago to deploy a Type 45 destroyer to the region. Is that true? And if so, when did the Navy make the recommendation to send a Type 45? And which minister took the decision to decline that advice from the Royal Navy and instead choose not to send a destroyer? Who? Most importantly, why was the decision taken not to send a Type 45 until attacks had already taken place against our base on Cyprus? And can the Secretary of State tell us on what date he expects HMS Dragon to be in position to provide air defence in the region? And furthermore, given the Chancellor's promise in her statement just now to reopen the Straits of Hormuz and France's pledge to provide escort ships, what other Royal Naval assets will we be sending to assist? This is the big one. Madam Deputy Speaker, it was on the 19th of February that the BBC reported that the United Kingdom would not allow the United States to use its bases to launch an attack on Iran. We know that 3 US Arleigh Burke destroyers, their equivalent of the Type 45, have for days been based in the Mediterranean, providing Cyprus with defence against ballistic missiles. Doesn't this mean that until the Prime Minister's U-turn a week ago, that this Labour government were displaying the most extraordinary double standards to our closest military ally, on the one hand denying the US the use of our bases, whilst on the other relying on them to protect ours? Exactly. One of the bases in question is Diego Garcia, Madam Deputy Speaker, absolutely critical for launching US heavy bombers. Now, it's bad enough for the Prime Minister to be U-turning over permission to use Diego Garcia whilst it is still our sovereign territory. How much worse will the situation be once we've started paying billions for the pleasure of Mauritius, a close ally of China, to have a say on whether such action complies with international law? So isn't it the case that when it comes to the Prime Minister's next and 17th U-turn, the best thing he could do is to scrap his crazy Chagos deal and spend every penny on the British Armed Forces? But this isn't just about the future of Diego Garcia. Last week, the Cypriot Foreign Minister said, and I quote, "There are questions about the future of the UK's military bases on the island." Isn't the reality that Greece, France and Spain are all sending ships, and that Labour's failure to deploy the Royal Navy to the Eastern Mediterranean has completely undermined our international standing, not just in the eyes of our many allies in the Middle East, but also in the eyes of those who can now exploit such weakness? So can the Secretary of State give his cast iron guarantee that UK sovereignty of our bases on Cyprus is not up for negotiation? Madam Deputy Speaker, of course, it's not just HMS Dragon that everyone is waiting for. At a time of war on multiple fronts, we've now been waiting months and months for the government to publish its long overdue defence investment plan. I cannot emphasise how serious this is. Britain urgently needs to rearm. It was right that we gave a huge amount of munitions to support Ukraine, but that has made our need to rearm even more pressing. Correct. So when exactly is the government going to publish the defence investment plan? Can the Secretary of State at least say if it will be published before local election purdah commences? That is a key question. Finally, isn't there a simple reason why there's no defence investment plan? And isn't it the same reason that for the first time in almost half a century there are no Royal Navy warships in the Middle East? Because when it comes to defence spending, this government has prioritised welfare over rearmament. Yes. They've chosen to spend billions more on benefits rather than strengthening our defence in a dangerous world. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, after all the Prime Minister's dither and delay, U-turns and weakness, will the Secretary of State finally demand from his Chancellor what we all know our armed forces need, a properly funded plan to get to 3% on defence this Parliament?
Secretary of State.
Well, let me start by recognising the fact that he supports the steps that we've taken to put UK defence capabilities into the Middle Eastern region, that his recognition and support for the fact we did this in advance of the current crisis, and these capabilities and our coordination of them have been alongside US allies and have been purely defensive in nature. We have been doing what Britain can best contribute to the protection of British interests, British personnel, British bases and British allies in the region. He asks me about Dragon. Well, we've been building up that significant military presence in the Middle East since January, which he, for the first time, has recognised and welcomed. It is totally right that as circumstances change, so should our military posture. He asks me when this option of Dragon was first put to ministers. As the Chief of the Defence Staff said on the BBC on Saturday, he looked at the proposals for Dragon being deployed to the Middle East on Tuesday last week, and I signed them off the same day. And I say to the right honourable gentleman, if he is unhappy about the state of the British Navy, he should take a hard look at his government's own record. Over 14 years, they hollowed out and underfunded our forces. They cut £12 billion from the defence budget in their first 5 years. Total frigate and destroyer numbers were cut from 23 to 17, and in 14 years in government they didn't order a single new destroyer. Madam Deputy Speaker, we only have Dragon available to go to the Middle East today because the Labour government commissioned it before 2010. And I'm proud of the work our military are doing in the Middle East. I reject claims about the response. We've got ahead of the first strikes in the way that we've set. And I've been unable to find any evidence, in public or in this House, of the Shadow Defence Secretary calling at any stage for military assets to be moved to the Middle East before the war began. Indeed, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, barely a month ago in this House, was saying in this chamber, calling for our military, and I quote, to prioritise or repurpose inventory to contribute to NATO's High North missions. He really is proving himself quite an armchair general. General hindsight, wise only after the event. And I'm really disappointed. He asks about the dip. We're working flat out to produce that. He asked about defence spending. He cut it. We invested in defence. We're rising the greatest increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. This year alone, we're spending £62 billion on defence. That is £8 billion more than the last year of their government. And I'm really disappointed, and I tell you our forces are disappointed, that he did not stand up and offer an apology for what his leader said on Friday. His leader's claim that British forces in the Middle East are just hanging around is totally wrong and deeply insulting. They are working flat out in the face of air raid sirens and warnings to protect British lives, protect British interests, protect British allies, and it's time the Tories did the decent thing, apologised for her remarks and withdrew them.
Chair of the Select Committee, Tanmanjeet Singh Desi.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Defence Secretary for advance sight of his statement and his operational briefing before. And I also want to pay tribute and praise our armed forces for their bravery, dedication and professionalism to defend our citizens and our allies in the region. I agree with the Defence Secretary that we must urge de-escalation and a return to the negotiation process. And I also am glad that the government pre-positioned Typhoons, F-35s, counter-drone units and other air defence assets into the region. But the lack of a naval presence should be a cause of huge concern for all of us. I appreciate the Secretary of State's comments that our armed forces are significantly overstretched from the high north to further beyond, and that the hollowing out in recent years has meant that we do not have enough assets. But what is being done to urgently rectify the situation and increase the investment into defence in the near future so that we can be in several places all at once?
I'm grateful for my honourable friend's support for the action that we've taken, the deployments that I've decided to commit to the region. He asks about what are we doing to make good 14 years of our armed forces being hollowed out and underfunded under the previous government. The first step to is increased defence spending. This year, more than £8 billion greater than the last year that the previous government was in. £270 billion in this Parliament alone, the single biggest increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War, and a defence investment plan that will follow up the Strategic Defence Review, a vision and a plan for rebuilding our forces, strengthening our deterrent, integrating our armed forces for the future, and harnessing the accelerating power of new technology, something that I'm grateful to he and his Defence Committee members for supporting and recognising.
Lib Dem spokesperson James McCleary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement today and echo his praise for the bravery and professionalism of our armed forces putting their lives on their line for us all. The Liberal Democrats continue to have grave concerns about the UK being dragged into Trump's illegal war. However, it is fair to say that the situation has evolved very quickly. So given that it is commonplace for UK personnel to serve aboard US Navy ships, including aircraft carriers like those currently engaged in attacks on Iran, can the Secretary of State provide assurance to this House that no UK personnel are currently serving aboard US Navy ships engaged in offensive operations in the Middle East? Furthermore, there have been serious questions raised about the use of UK bases for US airstrikes. So can the Secretary of State reassure the House on what monitoring is in place to ensure that US actions from UK bases remain purely defensive? And will the government ensure that any intelligence relating to US strikes conducted from UK bases is provided to the Intelligence and Security Committee for review? And if UK bases were used, or proposed to be used for offensive action beyond the government's authority, would the government withdraw permission immediately? Securing these guarantees is essential to ensure that the UK doesn't become complicit in Trump's unilateral and illegal war. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, even if the limited defensive actions carried out being asked for armed forces have exposed the stretched resources really are. So I must press the Secretary of State to give a clear time frame for the release of the Defence Investment Plan to start the urgent task of plugging these gaps. We must make sure that UK forces are given all the tools they need to do the jobs we ask of them both now and in the future.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said to the House in my statement, all decisions that we've taken, all actions in the face of this current conflict have been defensive in nature and legally well-based. That gives a sound foundation for ministers' decisions. It gives the forces personnel the fullest confidence in the actions they're taking. That is true of those that we've got deployed in the region. It will be true of those that we have embedded, I'm proud to say, in the US forces around the world. And I'm proud, Madam Deputy Speaker, that our US-UK relationship remains deep and close, and that we continue to do things together that no other nations will do.
Emma Lewell.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State is right that our armed forces are the very best of us. Australian and British media are reporting that HMS Anson has departed Western Australia ahead of schedule. Can my right honourable friend indicate whether HMS Anson will play a role in defending British interests in the region on her voyage home?
Madam Deputy Speaker, there are certain things that I will not and cannot disclose publicly, and the operations of our submarines fall into that category. My honourable friend is a long-standing member of the Defence Select Committee. I know she will understand the sensitivity and the potency of our submarine fleet. I know she asks the question, but she cannot realistically and reasonably expect the answer, and I know she knows that.
Lincoln Jock.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State for his statement? At that dispatch box about half an hour ago, perhaps unwisely, the Chancellor of the Exchequer delved into the world of military strategy, and she said a couple of things which were slightly alarming. Firstly, she upbraided, actually, the Shadow Chancellor for not calling for the de-escalation of the operations against Iran, and yet the Defence Secretary's own statement only mentions de-escalation when it comes to the situation in Lebanon. So could he just clarify whether he is calling on his American counterparts to de-escalate in Iran or not? And secondly, she said that in order to open the Straits of Hormuz, we would need to support something she called cross-country operations with France and the US, and that we were ready to do that to open the Straits of Hormuz. Could he comment on that too, please?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we as the UK Government are urging Iran to de-escalate. We are deeply concerned about regional stability, and part of the reason for our coordinated defensive actions, the contribution that we're making in the regional coordination centres, but also with our jets flying in defence of Middle Eastern allies, is to reinforce regional security and stability. Now, my honourable friend, the Chancellor, made an important statement this afternoon and included the commitment that she can confirm she'd approved for the Ministry of Defence access to the Special Reserve to deploy additional capabilities as they're needed to the Middle East. I'm sure the House will welcome that, as they will welcome the fact that she said, I'm committed to giving our military the resources they need.
Fred Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I strongly welcome my right honourable friend's leadership at this time. One of the defining characteristics of the UK's response to the crisis when Russia full-scale invaded Ukraine in 2022 was the political unity that this party offered our country in that response. So does my right honourable friend find it extremely disappointing to find the Leader of the Opposition saying that our military are hanging around when they are putting themselves in harm's way to defend our interests abroad? And does he expect, like I do, the Opposition Secretary of State to perhaps apologise for that really disappointing, cheap political point scoring?
My honourable friend is entirely right. When I had the honour of spending part of Thursday with our personnel on our base in Akrotiri, it wasn't just the teams and the pilots flying the fast jets that are working flat out. The F-35 team I spoke to had deployed at 5 days' notice to Cyprus. It was the whole military personnel on that base, including those looking after and ensuring the relocation of non-essential personnel and families to hotels in the Pathos area. Madam Deputy Speaker, nothing could be further from the truth. Nothing could be more insulting than the suggestion that they're simply hanging around in the Middle East. And I really would like to hear, we didn't hear it from the Shadow Defence Secretary, any of the honourable members on the benches opposite contest what their leader has said, apologise on her behalf, and let's have the sort of support that recognises our armed forces are in the region to protect British personnel, to protect British bases, to protect British interests, and we're proud that they're doing that job.
Sir Julian Lewis.
I'm not particularly keen on the tone of these exchanges, so may I make a positive suggestion to the Secretary of State? We've heard that Ukraine has offered to assist the United States with its specialized version of anti-Iranian drone technology. Yep. These weapons for bringing down Iranian drones are much cheaper than the drones themselves, whereas the weapons which the Americans and ourselves generally use are much more expensive. Given the difficult relationship between Zelensky and Trump, does the Secretary of State agree that there is a role here for Britain, with its high standing in Ukraine, to see if we can't make a start by acquiring from Ukraine some of these weapons, which we can use in defence of our own bases, and which may then pave the way for a deal between Trump and Zelensky for the wider benefit of the whole theatre?
Madam Deputy Speaker, if we take this one step at a time, and I appreciate the Right Honourable Gentleman's suggestion and the tone in which he offers his thoughts. First of all, he, like I, will welcome President Zelensky's declaration that Ukraine stands ready and is offering their experience and their expertise to Gulf states facing many of the same Shahid Iranian drones. We are playing our part. We have the Defence Special Advisor for the Middle East at the moment doing a series of visits to 9 Gulf countries with a team that includes British experts in the Ukrainian fight against Putin's invasion and the technologies they've been using in order to defeat many of Putin's developments and drones. And the Minister for Defence Readiness and Industry is also talking to British firms about the contribution that they could make to supplying the reinforced defences that our Middle Eastern partners so badly need.
Please, can I encourage members to ask short questions and the Secretary of State to give briefer answers. Paul Wall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I shed no tears for the demise of an Iranian regime which murdered and repressed tens of thousands of its own citizens, particularly women. But I'm proud that this government has not joined the US and Israel in this reckless war, which lacks a clear plan and which is hitting my constituents in the pocket and is threatening the global economy. Given that this government has its own independent foreign policy, it's not the handmaiden of Washington, as the Tories would want it, and nor is it the poodle of Putin, as Reform are. But can the Defence Secretary now tell me how important it is that the Chancellor is providing new funds for our armed forces who are defending British interests and British citizens in the region?
I do indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. My honourable friend is right to underline the statement and the commitment the Chancellor made this afternoon to this House. He's also right to point out that the US may be our closest ally, but as the Prime Minister has said, it is for the Prime Minister and the British Government to decide what is in Britain's best national interests.
I thank the Secretary of State for his statement. I listened very carefully to what he had to say about the authorisation of the US using UK bases and his confirmation that there are UK personnel embedded with US operations in the region. With that in mind, it seems all the more important that this government is entirely clear on the limits of the consent it has given to operating with the US. Defence Secretary Hesketh on Monday last week mocked the idea of rules of engagement and said he wanted to seek, and I quote, maximum lethality. President Trump then on Saturday said that new areas and groups of people would be under serious consideration for complete destruction. What confidence does the Secretary of State have that the US are following the same rules of engagement that he believes are legal for the UK?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I have the fullest confidence. These arrangements for access, basing and overflight are well established. The relations between the US and the UK are very close. We have operated these together before. We are doing so now.
To swallow.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Defence Secretary for all that he is doing to support our troops in the region and protect British citizens? It is clear that a long conflict would pose real risks not only to them but also to energy prices and the cost of living here in the UK. So can I ask him, does he agree that we need to see urgent de-escalation and a reduction in tensions across the region? And does he share my concern that the Conservatives and Reform would see us dragged into a conflict that can have such devastating consequences for British lives and livelihoods?
Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend makes important points, and when the first concern of this government, and I welcome his support for this, is the protection of British personnel, British citizens in the wider Middle East, our bases and our allies. I know he will support the action that we've taken, both before this current conflict broke out and in the week or so since. Thank you.
Dr. Andrew Murison.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Isn't the problem here not our military capability? We still have the second most capable navy in NATO. It is political will. Why is it that HMS Duncan is alongside in Portsmouth, having spent the summer in a maintenance period, the sister ship of HMS Dragon? She has been up and ready to go for weeks. And why is it the case that she wasn't sent at the beginning of this crisis?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman's another former minister in the previous government in the Defence Department. He knows all about the decisions that have left our Navy in the state that it's in now. But he will also appreciate that we've taken decisions to deploy the things that Britain can best put into the region to protect our allies and to protect our people, both military and civilian. He will recognise and applaud the fact that because of that, from day one, our fast jets have been flying defensive operations in coordination with our allies and our US colleagues, and that where the circumstances change, we will adapt the action and the decisions that we take, which is just what we've done from the point that we saw the indiscriminate extent of the Iranian response last Saturday.
Peter Prinsley.
Madam Deputy Speaker, Iran has a network of proxies and lone actors who threaten security here at home. Will the Minister join me in thanking all the volunteers of the Community Security Trust who protect our Jewish places of worship and schools? Never have they been more crucial.
I will indeed. My honourable friend is right. The Community Security Trust does extraordinary work in very difficult times and is responding to deep unease and deep concern and, in some cases, serious fears amongst the Jewish community in this country.
Sir Roger Gale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I first say that I don't know of anybody on these benches that would not wish to associate themselves with the Secretary of State's praise for the courage and determination of our armed services, both worldwide and particularly in Cyprus. I have to declare an interest, Madam Deputy Speaker, as you know, as an honorary citizen of Cyprus. The Republic of Cyprus has maintained a principle of neutrality, and that has served British nationals and others well over many years. Akrotiri is based exactly almost between Paphos and Larnaca. It's a very difficult situation for the Secretary of State to square. Could he tell the House what steps will be taken to protect those many British nationals resident in Cyprus and those many other British visitors who hitherto have gone to the island for their holidays?
I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman's remarks about our armed forces, and I will ensure that those are passed on. I hadn't realised he was an honorary citizen of Cyprus, and I hope he will appreciate in my statement I confirmed that the head of the National Guard confirms that cooperation between our militaries has never been closer, and I hope he'll appreciate that the defensive capabilities and activities that we are running from Akrotiri are part not just of defending our base, but defending our people right across Cyprus and the island of Cyprus itself. And from that island, we can also and are help defend regional allies.
Alex Baker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to say thank you to the Secretary of State for everything that he is doing to support all of my constituents in the region and keep them safe.